So one of my favorite gaming franchises is definitely the Resident Evil franchise. I remember renting a PlayStation 1 with a copy of Resident Evil, and I just instantly fell in love with this game. I love horror stuff. I love spooky stuff. So this game was right up my alley. And throughout the years, we've gotten so many Resident Evil games, some really awesome, some maybe not so much, but everyone always looks forward to the future of Resident Evil and what are the new games going to be in the series. Well, there's been two games that have been talked about lately, Resident Evil Outrage and Resident Evil 3 Revelations, which allegedly was a Nintendo Switch exclusive game, at least from a timed exclusive standpoint. But we haven't gotten any information on these games. And I was kind of thinking, what's up? I heard about these games, earlier in the year. Why haven't we seen anything from these games? So I linked up with Nate Drake, aka NateTheHate. You might know him, you might not know him. His channel is in the description box down below. And we did a little chat about these games. Now, none of this is absolute concrete, but Nate has been right about a lot of things. He does have really good inside connections. So I definitely trust him when he talks about this. So that's what we're going to do in today's video. We're going to uncover the mystery of Resident Evil Outrage and Resident Evil Revelations 3 for the Switch. So if this is your first time on the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button, like and share the video. But without any further ado, let's get into this discussion. All right, so we have the legendary NateTheHate on the channel today. I'll have a link to his YouTube in the description box down below. Make sure you guys go check that out. Him and MVG do a podcast on there. Really good stuff. They go super in-depth into a lot of video game topics. But I had him come on the channel today because we talked a little bit off the air about some Resident Evil information, and I'm a huge Resident Evil fan. So we're just going to jump straight into this. Resident Evil Outrage. Now, this was supposed to be a sort of sequel to Resident Evil Outbreak, which originally released on the PlayStation 2, which was a sort of multiplayer focused experience, except that a lot of people didn't have the broadband adapter for their PlayStation 2. So the game never really popped off like it could have. I thought the idea of it was really cool. And it seemed like in the modern era, something like that would be very interesting. There had been lots of leaks about Resident Evil Outrage, but it seems like this project may have been pushed to the back burner or may have actually been canceled. Is that correct?
Yes, based on the information that I've received over the last several months, it suggests that Resident Evil Outrage has in fact been canceled. And as you mentioned, it was a multiplayer focused game. And I believe it was supposed to take place sometime between the events of Code Veronica and Resident Evil 4 in terms of narrative. But yeah, unfortunately, the title does appear to have been canceled.
Now, do you think that's because they're going to focus on something else? Like, has the multiplayer of Resident Evil Village come out yet? Like, I last checked like 2 months ago and it still wasn't out, and I was just like, okay, whatever, I'm giving up on this. Do you think maybe they're shifting resources to that since that seems to be having trouble getting off the ground?
I mean, that's entirely possible. And as you mentioned, yeah, Resident Evil Reverse has yet to come to market, and it could just be a fact that Capcom really hasn't had a successful multiplayer or an online driven Resident Evil game in a couple of generations now, and each time they come out with a new installment, it seems to be directionless. And Outrage could have just been one of those factors where they were looking at it and it simply wasn't coming together in what they envisioned, so they shifted resources potentially to another multiplayer project, or maybe to the Resident Evil 4 remake, or maybe even to Resident Evil 9.
Well, yeah, because they had what was that one game that came out? I think it came out on the PS3 and the Xbox 360. That was a Resident Evil multiplayer game. I remember it had a demo and I played it once and I was like, oh my God, this is like the worst shit in the world. I don't remember the subtitle of it, but I'll throw up some overlay video of that. But yeah, it does seem like they sort of don't know what they want to do in multiplayer aspects. And it seems like, like I said, Outbreak might not have really lit the world on fire or anything like that. And obviously it was hindered by some of the, design limitations of the PlayStation 2, and most importantly, the multiplayer infrastructure of the PlayStation 2. But it seems like they would want to try that again in the more modern era, because I think that's what fans want. Like, they don't want this necessarily, just sort of thrown on extra stuff, or something like Reverse, which, I mean, really, it looks ridiculous. Like, it looks like a joke. And it's like, this isn't really encapsulating Resident Evil, but I guess you could kind of say that it might have something to do with the fact that Resident Evil, since a game like Outbreak, has definitely changed, with the introduction of the more action-orientated stuff. And now, with 7 and 8 being from a first-person perspective, the series has definitely changed a lot. So, I would have liked to have seen what Outrage was about, but you know, I know the last thing we really heard about it was from earlier this year, like back in February, and then there was actually rumors about what Outrage actually was, that it wasn't that multiplayer thing, and that sort of segues into the next portion of this video, but that Outrage was essentially Resident Evil Revelations 3, and they were one and the same, but you have heard that they were two separate projects, right?
Correct. Outrage was a multiplayer game, had nothing to do with Resident Evil for the Switch, and I'm not sure how the two ended up becoming linked together, because if you looked at the Capcom Giga Leak, where they revealed 5 years worth of projects, Resident Evil Outrage was listed there, and it was always listed as a PlayStation, Xbox, and I believe even a PC title with a multiplayer focus. How it ended up getting interlinked to a Resident Evil Switch game is really baffling to me, but that was kind of the narrative that the community has set forth from earlier this year. So every time a topic came up regarding Resident Evil Switch, it was always referred to as Resident Evil Outrage, and that is not the case. The belief was that the Resident Evil Switch game was going to be Revelations 3.
Right. And that's sort of what we're talking about next. And I do know why those two got put in together. It was one of the Resident Evil leakers, but we won't say names on here because, hey, you know, we're not trying to start drama in these streets. But so Revelations 3. Now, obviously, a lot of people got very excited about that. That has been something that's been talked a lot about. And I think a lot of people got even more excited about it earlier this year because of the success of Monster Hunter Rise in both terms of sales and, of course, the technical performance of that game, because now the RE engine is indeed running on the Nintendo Switch. And I mean, this has to be one of the top, if not the top engines available on the Nintendo Switch in terms of what you can do with it to really give it that sort of, you know, current generation feel where it's like, oh, wow, this is a Nintendo Switch game. So Resident Evil Revelations 3, a lot of people expected, you know, there to be information on this game coming out before the end of the year, but it seems like that's not going to happen. And from what I've heard and what I've been told, and I'm sure you could clarify this, there seems to be two trains of thoughts: that either A, there is some development trouble with the game, maybe Capcom isn't necessarily wanting to do it, and the other train of thought would have to be, of course, that 4K Nintendo Switch, that game would obviously want to utilize something like that. So that's sort of why they're holding back information.
Yeah, it's been a very difficult project to get information on. There have been numerous rumors come out. Largely, one was that Rebecca would be the lead character. Now, Rebecca we haven't really seen in Resident Evil games outside of Resident Evil 1, but that was the belief, that she would be a lead character. And since that information came out, there's been very little new information, so the project seems to be quite elusive. And that's been really its biggest problem, is that no one is getting new information on the game. I haven't heard anything pertaining to the project in many months now, and it's left me wondering whether the project is delayed, canceled, or if it's simply outsourced to an external studio outside of Capcom itself, and that's what's making information so difficult. And right now, that's where I'm kind of viewing it as a to-be-determined project. It could still be an active development, and it is simply an external project, so information is just slow to come by. Or, as you mentioned, maybe this is a project that has since shifted to the Switch 4K or the Switch Dane, and Capcom simply has it on the back burner until that hardware is closer to release, which, you know, definitely makes some sense, because when you look at the Switch's success worldwide, it's baffling that we have not had a Resident Evil of its own come to the platform. Monster Hunter Rise was very successful. We've seen what the RE engine can do on the platform, so you would expect an original Resident Evil game to find its way to the system. We've had ports of the previous games, and I do believe that Capcom had attempted to bring Resident Evil 7 natively to the Switch, but the problem was that the RE engine, despite its scalable techniques, simply wasn't able to port the game up to par that what Capcom was looking for in terms of performance and resolution. So they had to opt for that cloud version.
Right.
So you would expect that they definitely want to bring a native original Resident Evil game to the Switch platform, because we've seen numerous success with Capcom's exclusives. So it's really a question of when, not if, in my opinion.
And I think that, you know, Capcom and Nintendo, they obviously have had ups and downs in their relationship, but you know, look at the GameCube era. Resident Evil 4 was the game on the GameCube, Resident Evil 0 on the GameCube as well. And then, like you said, all of the ports of the Resident Evil games that have come over, games like Resident Evil Revelations 1, which, you know, even though it's an older game, I still think it looks absolutely fantastic. You have so many Resident Evil games on the system. But I think on the other hand, you do make a good point, is that you kind of have to wonder about Capcom, especially when it comes to Resident Evil titles, because think of how many things change in the development of Resident Evil titles. Look at something like Resident Evil 4. When you look at that beta footage to the final footage, it's night and day. When you look at canceled Resident Evil projects, such as Resident Evil on the Game Boy Color, which was like 98% done. I actually have a repro cartridge of that, and it was a great version of Resident Evil, absolutely mind-blowing, that runs on the Game Boy Color. But they canceled it. They left it out to dry. And it's like, you were so close to completing that. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and that's a great point, because the original Resident Evil 4 that was in development eventually became Devil May Cry.
Right.
And then if you think back to an E3 with the PlayStation P, or the PlayStation Portable, they announced Resident Evil Portable, which never came to market. So Capcom has this knack of starting a lot of projects, announcing them, and then canceling them behind the scenes. And with Resident Evil Switch, this is something that was never officially announced.
Right.
This was always a background conversation where there were rumors of a game in development. And though it was exclusive to the Switch, it was only supposed to be timed exclusive, so it would come to other platforms later. And this could simply be a case of maybe the game became too ambitious, which was also a rumor at a time that Revelations 3, some of the concepts were actually merged into Resident Evil Village. So maybe this was something that was in development, became Village, or aspects went into Village, and Revelations 3 is just kind of on that back burner where they're still shopping around ideas. And, you know, that's something we may never get a clear answer on, but that's really the problem with Resident Evil Switch, is that something was in development. It's just a question of, is it still in development?
Right. And, you know, I would love to see Revelations 3. I am a huge fan of the Revelations game, because I feel like, you know, even Revelations 2, they do a good job of blending the more action-orientated style with the more traditional survival horror style. I do love the newer Resident Evil games, of course, but I do sort of like that throwback sort of stuff in the games. Well, I mean, thank you for coming on. I sincerely appreciate this. I'm glad we could get this information out there to people. Be sure to check out Nate's channel in the description box down below. Like I said, Nate the Hate, thank you for coming on, buddy.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, catch you guys on the next video. Later.